Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Insomniac Files, where reality and the dream world collide in a haze of mystery and suspense. Each night, we embark on a journey through the darkest corners of the subconscious, and tonight's tale is no exception. Prepare yourself for an adventure that will blur the line between sleep and waking, where nightmares manifest and secrets from the deepest recesses of your mind emerge. As we walk this path, know this: in the world of dreams, nothing is ever truly as it seems. The corridor lights blinked twice, then died. Saint Ferris Hospital had endured storms before, but this time was different. The wind hadn't howled. No transformer explosion. No warning. Just a silence, sharp and sudden, as if someone had pinched the hospital's throat shut. Emergency lights flickered dimly along the floor, casting weak glows that shimmered off polished tile. All patient monitors froze. The usual rhythmic beeping that filled the night dissolved into a thick, breathless hush. And then the scream. A high, shattering sound from Ward G, female. Sharp enough to wake patients 2 wings over. By the time orderlies reached room G12, Nurse Kira Mountfield was already dead. Collapsed beside the bed of a sleeping patient, her fingers still gripping a penlight, her pulse absent, and her lips slightly parted, as if she'd been about to speak. No blood. No sign of trauma. No struggle. She simply fell. By dawn, the power had returned. But memories did not. Every staff member on duty that night, from surgeons to janitors, claimed the same thing. Between 2:30 and 4 o'clock, they remembered nothing. Just fragments. Static. A feeling of being watched. Even the cameras had blacked out. No digital trace. No footage. Just a 2-hour void across every device. And yet one patient, in isolation, had left a note, the only clue. The man with no face was humming. Detective Hauser read the report, jaw tight. Dr. Herlock Gnomes stood behind him, barefoot as always, holding a cracked stopwatch. Time, he said softly, isn't the only thing missing. Room G12 had been sealed for investigation, but the scent of antiseptic hadn't masked what lingered beneath. Something faint, metallic, and wrong, like rainwater trickling through copper pipes. Detective Hauser stood at the threshold, arms crossed. The floor beneath the nurse's body had been scrubbed twice, yet still bore the outline of her shoes and dried saline. Not blood, not urine, just a faint splash as though she'd collapsed mid-step during a code blue. Dr. Gnomes didn't look at the bed. Instead, he pressed his ear against the far wall. It's not what happened in this room, he murmured. It's what tried to leave. Hauser frowned. She died right there, he said. No injuries, no toxins, no seizure. Heart just stopped. Gnomes turned slowly, his eyes distant. She was writing something, he whispered. Not on paper. He knelt beside the metal wall rail, the kind used to steady patients as they walked. With a gloved finger, he traced along its edge. Then paused. Etched faintly into the surface, hardly visible, were letters, written backwards, as if scratched from a mirror. Open the window. Hauser looked toward the glass. It's sealed, he said. It was sealed, Gnomes corrected. They both stepped forward. Though every window in Saint Ferris was factory locked, reinforced, limited to a 1-inch tilt for safety, this one sat ajar by at least 3 inches. Too far. Gnome stared for a moment, then pulled from his coat pocket a litmus swab, running it across the sill. The paper turned faintly violet. Chlorhexidine, he muttered. But aerosolized. Fresh. Used to disinfect wounds. You think someone sprayed through the window? No, Gnomes said, almost gently. I think something escaped. Hauser's jaw tightened. And where would it go? Gnomes blinked once, slowly. To the basement, he said. Where the generator failed, but shouldn't have. The stairs down to the sub-basement groaned beneath their weight. Hauser's flashlight beam flickered against walls painted decades ago, pale mint green now chipped and discolored to ash gray. No hospital signage marked this level. No labels. No staff photos. Just pipes, sweating, old, humming faintly with the memory of pressure. This part of the hospital isn't on the new floor plans, Hauser muttered, voice low. Because it predates them. Gnomes replied, one step ahead, coat fluttering faintly with each movement. Built when this was still Saint Ferris Infirmary, back in 1939. Before the renovations. Before electricity reached the whole city. The hallway narrowed. Their torches passed over rows of dusty doors, each labeled in faded brass. Records, boiler access, hydrotherapy storage. Then they stopped at one. Phase isolation, D. Gnomes pressed his palm to the door. It was cool. Damp. Inside, the air changed. No longer musty, but sterile, sweet, and cold. Too cold. A single bulb flickered overhead. The room was nearly empty. Except for one thing, a hospital bed. Clean. White. Made. And strapped to its metal headrest, an old patient chart, the kind written by hand. Ink smudged, pages yellowed. The name had been half torn, but one word remained. March. Hauser's breath caught. Elias March? From the Echo Ward case? Gnomes didn't answer. He stepped forward and opened the chart. Every page had been filled with identical symbols, not letters, not numbers. Just a looping spiral, again and again. And on the final page, one sentence. He watched through the blackout. He never blinked. Hauser's voice dropped. So what was this? A monitoring chamber? No, Gnomes whispered, staring at the empty bed. A cage. And the straps had been cut from inside. They emerged from the sub-basement into silence, though the air around them had shifted, thinner now. Tinged with the faint scent of iodine and something less familiar, ozone, perhaps, or static caught between walls. Hauser kept glancing over his shoulder. They built that room to hold something, he said finally. But it wasn't a patient. Gnomes said nothing. Instead, he knelt near a ventilation grate beside the stairwell exit. With a small, magnetic screwdriver, he loosened the cover. Inside, barely visible, was a fragment of gauze, blue-tinted, medical grade. And beneath it, faint grooves in the duct's metal surface. Not scratches. Not tool marks. Sound waves. Etched in perfect sine curves, like the residue of a tuning fork pressed against the steel. It's following the vents, Gnomes whispered. Sound traveling through metal, a frequency that shouldn't echo. But it does. Hauser crouched beside him, eyes narrowing. Are you saying sound did this? I'm saying sound remembers, Gnomes replied. Even when people don't. He held a stethoscope to the duct. Nothing. Then, faintly, a hum. Not a melody. Not a voice. Just one note, low and consistent, vibrating like a distant cello string. Hauser shivered. Same tone the patient wrote about. The man with no face. Gnomes didn't move. That phrase, it's wrong. What do you mean? It wasn't a man without a face, Gnomes murmured. It was a face without a man. Arms folded, expression unreadable. Gnome stood closer, eyes locked on the incision. Did she have any auditory damage? He asked softly. Mireille frowned. Her eardrums were intact, but there was an odd dilation of the cochlear aqueducts. It's not common, usually seen in barotrauma cases. Sudden pressure shifts, Gnome said, almost to himself. Like deep-sea divers. Or sound exposure, Hauser added. Gnomes nodded slowly. Resonance, he whispered. Not just heard, but felt. He leaned in and examined the carotid artery. There, near the bifurcation, was a thin thread of calcified residue. Bone dust. Old, fine, settled in the vessel wall like snow. Someone, or something, released sound into the body. Not air. Not gas. Vibration. And what would that do? Hauser asked. If tuned correctly, Gnome said, it would move fluid, stir memory, shake organs. Kill a nurse? No, Gnomes murmured. Scare her into death. The humming returned, this time, from the hospital speaker above. Just one note. Again. And again. Until the light in the autopsy room began to pulse. At precisely 2:03 a.m., the backup generator roared to life, though no one had touched its controls. The lights in Saint Ferris stuttered back into existence floor by floor, as though the building itself were waking from a fevered sleep. Machines beeped in sync, monitors blinked in acknowledgement, and for one long moment, the corridors felt mechanical. Too coordinated. Too alive. Gnomes and Hauser stood in the power control room, watching the dials spin themselves into place. The generator, an old diesel relic from the 1960s, should have required a manual override. But it had self-cycled, perfectly timed. No motion detected in the server hall, said a voice over the intercom. But all devices have resumed function. Gnomes didn't respond. He was staring at the digital panel. Look closely, he said to Hauser, pointing at the timeline of power loss. The blackout had lasted exactly 33 minutes and 33 seconds. Coincidence? Hauser asked. Maybe, Gnomes replied. But in cardiac arrest protocol, 33 seconds is the critical threshold before hypoxic injury begins. You think the duration was calculated? I think something new, Gnomes whispered. How long it could go unseen? He turned to the server cabinet, which was humming softly, like a throat clearing before speech. A small LED on its side was blinking a sequence, short, long, then repeating. Is that Morse? Hauser asked. Gnomes leaned in. No, he said slowly. It's the same timing as a sinus node pulse. The rhythm that governs the heart. So the server's mimicking a heartbeat? Or someone recorded one. Then, for the briefest second, the screens all flickered with an image, a face, wide-eyed, mouth open, as if screaming. But only Gnomes saw it. And he didn't blink. Back in pathology, Dr. Mireille had prepared a second slide from Nurse Mountfield's epidermis. Under the microscope, her skin showed signs of microtears, thousands of tiny, symmetrical disruptions in the dermis layer. Not caused by pressure, not friction, but resonance, like hairline fractures in glass from a violin's highest note. Gnomes adjusted the focus himself, squinting. There, he murmured. Right beneath the basal layer, pockets of air. Microscopic, spherical. Imploded. Like the remnants of a burst bubble. Hauser leaned over. What does it mean? It means, Gnome said softly, that her skin tried to breathe. The words hung in the air. Tried? Gnomes nodded. It's as if, for a moment, her skin believed it was the lung. As if it remembered another function. Something old. Primal. Hallucination? Not chemical. Not induced. No foreign substances found. Gnome stood, stepping away from the microscope, gaze now fixed on the morgue wall. She experienced full-body dysregulation. Her nervous system began to map itself wrong. The brain's sensory cortex misfired. It told her skin to inhale. Her heart thought it had no lungs. Her lungs thought they were ears. And the source? Hauser asked, voice now quieter. Gnomes didn't move. Sound, he said. A frequency no human should hear. A tone that doesn't communicate meaning, but reprograms function. A silence followed, deeper than before. Then, faintly, from the corridor beyond the morgue came footsteps. Slow. Wet. Shuffling. Hauser reached for his badge. Gnomes held out a hand. Don't move, he whispered. It's not someone walking. Hauser's eyes narrowed. What is it? Gnomes tilted his head to listen. It's memory, he said, echoing back. They followed the footsteps in silence, down a corridor with mirrors mounted at intervals, relics from a time when staff used polished glass to guide gurneys through tight corners. The humming had faded now, replaced by something more uncanny, a rhythmic dragging, like someone moving slowly in slippers that were one size too big. Hauser led the way, hand resting near his holster though he hadn't drawn it. Room 214 was the end of the line. The nameplate was missing. The window had been painted over. And the door was ajar. Gnomes reached out slowly and pushed it open. Inside, there was no patient. No bed. Just a chair facing a blank wall. And a mirror. But the mirror, old, circular, and rimmed with oxidized silver, reflected nothing. Not the room. Not them. Not even light. Hauser stepped forward, frowning. Is it turned the wrong way? No, Gnomes whispered. It's absorbing light. Not reflecting it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a pen light. Shining it directly at the mirror's surface, he expected some sort of bounce, a glint, a scatter. There was none. Instead, the beam vanished entirely, consumed. As if the mirror ate light. Hauser exhaled. This is absurd. It's a trick. But when he turned toward the door, his own reflection didn't follow. It stood still, facing the mirror, unmoving. And smiling. Gnomes placed a hand on Hauser's shoulder. Stepped back slowly. Their own shadows returned as they left the room. And the humming began again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the vents. It was coming from inside the mirror. They returned to the staff archive, a small, dusty room locked behind 2 keypads and 3 redundant filing systems. Most of the records had been digitized decades ago, but some files remained on paper, bound in manila folders, labeled in handwriting that had long since faded. Gnomes located a box marked Restricted, D33 cases. He pulled it out carefully, setting it on the floor. The first folder inside was brittle with age, its paper edges curled and darkened. Hauser leaned over. What's Deadlight Protocol? He asked, reading the scrawl on the cover. Gnomes flipped the file open. Inside were medical diagrams, brain scans annotated by hand. Most showed the prefrontal cortex, enlarged, with abnormal levels of stimulation in Broca's area and Wernicke's region. Language centers, Gnome said softly. These people experienced rapid activation before death, like their brains were decoding a signal. The accompanying patient logs were strange. Notes from orderlies. One entry read, Patient began reciting coordinates in Sumerian. Mouth bled. No prior knowledge of the language, another said. Eyes remained open after brain death. Optic nerve remained reactive. And finally, tried to stop her breathing. Not because she couldn't breathe, but because she thought someone else was breathing through her. Hauser's hand tightened on the folder. They were trying to stop a transmission, he muttered. Or prevent one, Gnomes added. Deadlight wasn't a patient protocol. It was a containment one. He turned the page. A photograph slipped out. Black and white. Blurry. It showed a hospital bed. A man restrained. Eyes open. Mouth stitched shut. Hauser picked it up carefully. Is that March? No, Gnomes said. But he has the same eyes. And in the corner of the image, barely visible, was the shape of the mirror from room 214. 3:33 a.m. The lights in Saint Ferris dimmed again, not fully off, but to the shade of a whisper. The air conditioners stalled. The hallway clocks froze. Time, it seemed, had been suspended. Hauser and Gnomes stood in the observation theater above the operating suite, a wide glass wall overlooking the empty surgery room. Or so it seemed. Then the humming returned. But this time, it carried a different tone, layered, complex. It wasn't just a note. It was speech. Warped, low, and stretched as though underwater. Hauser leaned forward. It's saying something, he murmured. But the words aren't real. Gnomes didn't blink. Not language. Frequency. It's using speech as a tool. Not for meaning. For movement. Below them, something appeared on the surgical table. Not a body. Not a machine. Just a shadow. Lying perfectly still, rising and falling with a rhythm that mimicked breath. Then the shadow opened its eyes and stared directly up at them. Hauser drew his torch instinctively. But the moment light touched the shadow, it vanished, dissolved into particles that scattered like ash across the metal table. Then a voice, but not over the intercom. It came from inside the glass. Room 306 is not empty, it whispered. Hauser spun around. But they were alone. Gnomes exhaled slowly. The blackout wasn't power loss, he said. It was a phase shift. A tuning. To what? Hauser asked. Gnomes looked down at the surgical floor. To whatever was waiting, just beyond sound. They returned to room 306 with a cautious step, the kind used when approaching an old minefield, or a question with too many answers. Elias March still lay perfectly still, his eyes closed now, lips parted in soft expiration. The pulse oximeter read a steady 60, as before, but something had shifted. Subtly. As if the air in the room no longer belonged to this world. Gnome stood at the foot of the bed again. Hands behind his back. Same body, he murmured. Different vessel. Hauser narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Gnomes reached forward and gently pressed his fingers to the side of March's neck. His pulse is present, he said. But it's not responding to physical contact. There's no vagal reaction. The heart beats independently. Pacemaker? No implant, Gnomes replied. His heart isn't being driven. It's repeating. Hauser frowned. Like a recording? Gnomes nodded slowly. Yes. A loop. Perfectly consistent. Like a sample. Outside the window, lightning split the clouds. No thunder followed. Hauser walked around to the bedside and stared into March's face. Then he noticed something strange. The lines on the old man's face were vanishing. wrinkles smoothing, pigmentation evening out, the skin tightening ever so slightly, as if age itself were retreating. Hauser turned sharply. He's reversing? No, said Gnomes. He's resetting. And then, faintly, from the wall behind them, came the sound of humming. But this time, it was a child's voice. They traced the humming to a structural cavity between rooms 306 and 308, an abandoned medical storage space sealed off decades ago after asbestos was discovered in the ventilation system. Using a skeleton key and considerable effort, Gnomes wedged the rusted door open. Inside, darkness. Cold. And the sound of breath that didn't belong to either of them. The room was lined with acoustic foam, not modern, but hand-carved blocks of compressed material, shaped like jagged sound waves. The foam had been painted black, absorbing not just light, but sound itself. Hauser stepped cautiously inside. Gnomes followed, his eyes adjusting quicker than most. A single cassette player sat in the center of the floor, its tape deck open, but no tape inside. On the wall above it, scrawled in red, "Echoes don't die. They nest." Hauser turned sharply. "What is this place?" "A repository," Gnomes whispered. "A sound vault." He knelt and inspected the cassette player, then opened the battery housing. Empty. "No power source," he murmured. "Yet it's warm." Hauser touched the device. It vibrated, not mechanically, but like the resonance of a tuning fork. And then, for a fraction of a second, it spoke. "I remember when you were born." Hauser dropped it. The voice had been his father's. But his father had died 15 years ago. The cassette player had no tape. No speaker. No connection. Gnomes straightened, the faintest tremor in his voice. "This isn't playback," he said. "This is bioacoustic memory, your body storing sound, in your skin." Back in the lab, Gnomes wasted no time. He placed a microdermal sample from Nurse Mountfield under the high-frequency scanner, a prototype device of his own design, one that used targeted sound waves instead of light to reveal internal cellular structures. Hauser watched as the image on the screen lit up. Not in the usual color-coded histograms, but in pulses. Small, rhythmic, undulating forms like ocean waves caught in a tide they didn't control. "Look," Gnomes whispered. "Each pulse matches the timing of the server heartbeat we saw earlier." He rewound the scanner. The pulses returned, but now they began to form shapes. Letters. Sound encoded in cells. "Play it," Hauser said. Gnomes hesitated, then activated the sonic decoder. The speakers emitted a low, warbling drone, then a pattern of tones that coalesced into words. "Echo nest activated. Extraction protocol incomplete. Host remains viable." Hauser's hand went to his temple. The words weren't just heard, they vibrated inside his bones. "What the hell is this?" Gnomes turned to him slowly. "Our bodies remember more than trauma. They remember sound. Stored in fascia. In dermal layers. In synaptic rhythm. You're saying sound leaves a residue?" "Yes," Gnomes said. "And in her case, Nurse Mountfield wasn't just exposed. She was written into. Like overwritten data?" "Exactly." Hauser backed away. "So what are we looking at here?" Gnomes turned to the monitor, which now pulsed gently on its own. "A new kind of infection," he said. "Not viral, not bacterial, but auditory. A disease," he whispered, "made entirely of memory." At 3:11 a.m., a call came from the third floor. One of the surviving nurses, Clara Vane, had regained consciousness. She had been unconscious since the blackout, found collapsed in the hallway near the west stairwell. No signs of injury. No cardiac event. Simply silent. Now she sat upright in her hospital bed, eyes unfocused, lips moving slowly, muttering sounds that didn't make sense. Hauser and Gnomes arrived together, greeted by the dim glow of the bedside monitor. Nurse Vane turned her head toward them, her gaze fixed not on their faces, but behind them, as though a shape only she could see stood in the doorway. Then she spoke. "Ishti Khalif Naci," she said softly. Hauser frowned. "What?" Gnomes lifted a hand. "Say that again," he said gently. She repeated it. This time, Gnomes recorded it, reversed the audio on his handheld device, and played it back. The reversed sentence came through clearly. "I can feel like this." Hauser's brow furrowed. "Like what?" Gnomes turned back to Clara. "What do you feel?" She stared ahead. Her mouth moved again. But no words emerged, only tone. A soft, humming resonance, the exact same pitch and rhythm they'd heard from Elias March. A chill ran through the room. "She's not speaking," Gnomes murmured. "She's transmitting." Hauser stepped closer. "To whom?" Gnomes replied without looking away. "To whatever's still listening." Gnomes returned to the echo vault beneath the storage wing, this time with new equipment, an experimental transducer headset, designed to convert subsonic resonance into visible spectrograms. He placed the headset against the padded wall and let it hum. The wall vibrated, barely perceptible, like the exhale of a sleeping giant. Lines formed across the tablet screen, waves, vertical distortions, and then, symbols. Letters. They were old. Not English. Not even Latin. Hauser leaned over. "What language is that?" "It's not a language," Gnomes said, eyes narrowed. "It's instruction." The pattern repeated every 4.4 seconds. And in that span, Gnomes began to understand, not with his mind, but with his nervous system. His fingers twitched in rhythm. His breath began to match the silent cadence. Hauser noticed. "You're sinking." Gnomes nodded once, then pulled the headset off. His skin was pale. "I know what happened to the nurse." Hauser waited. "She didn't hear the tone," Gnomes whispered. She answered it. Back in the lab, Gnomes began testing the biological impact of exposure to the tone. He downloaded the spectral structure from the Echo Vault and played it in microbursts to samples of human muscle tissue. Each time, the tissue contracted, spasming, even when removed from any nervous input. Autonomous response. As though sound could control the body without consent. Then, on a hunch, he played the tone for 33 seconds, the same duration as the blackout. And the tissue stopped moving altogether. A total biological freeze. No degradation. No decay. Just stillness. Hauser, watching from the edge of the lab, finally spoke. "Could this explain the gaps? Why no one remembers anything during the blackout?" Gnomes nodded. "The brain didn't go offline, it went silent. Like a piano key held without a note." He placed his hand on the monitor. And in that silence, something else spoke. At 4:06 a.m., the central server, which had remained silent since the flicker, powered on of its own accord. Its speakers activated, and it spoke. Not through synthetic tones or programmed voice, but through mimicry. It began with Clara Vane's voice, looping, "I can feel like this," in reverse, then morphing into Elias March's hum, then into the voice of Dr. Murray. Until finally, it echoed Hauser's own voice, saying words he had never spoken. "You shouldn't have come back here." The lights dimmed, and every monitor in the hospital blinked to the same phrase. "Host still viable." Hauser looked at Gnomes, pale and breathless. "This thing, it's not in the walls, is it?" Gnomes didn't speak. He only placed his hand flat against his chest. "It's in us." The silence in the room deepened, not emptiness, but pressure. A fullness, like standing underwater. Gnomes stood motionless, the phrase, "Host still viable," glowing from every monitor. The servers speak, but as they approached the threshold, a strange feeling overtook them both. Pressure returned behind the eyes. Muffled thoughts. As though their minds were being gently muted. The door to the wing stood slightly ajar. "Locked?" Hauser asked. "It was," Gnomes murmured. Inside, the hallway was intact but off. Dust undisturbed. Beds still made. Clocks stopped at 3:14 a.m. The same time as the blackout. Hauser touched one of the bedsheets. It dissolved under his fingers, not from age, but from overexposure to vibration. The same tone. The same frequency. Everywhere. "This place wasn't sealed," Gnomes whispered. "It was quarantined." "But from what?" A low rumble answered him, not from within the room, but within their bones. Something in the walls hummed. Responding. Listening. Echoing them back. They found it in the records room. A single patient file, unfiled, coated in gray dust, untouched for decades. The name: Dr. Emery Civil. Admission: 1996. Discharge: never recorded. "Why does that name sound familiar?" Hauser muttered. Gnomes opened the file. The photo inside was heavily water damaged, but the notes remained legible. Presented with auditory hallucinations. Reports of ambient presence. Skin resonance confirmed via microtone spectroscopy. But the final entry stopped both men cold. Subject demonstrates signal inducement. Nearby patients enter dreamlike trace when exposed to Civil's hum. Effect contagious via secondary exposure. Hauser inhaled sharply. "This started 30 years ago." Gnomes nodded, his face grim. "And we never ended it," he said. "Just walled it off." "But if the effect is contagious," Hauser added, "and we've been exposed." Gnomes looked up slowly. "Then the dream," he said, "might not end with us." Deep in the archive logs, Gnomes found a corrupted audio file. Last entry before the wing was shut down. Timestamp: 3:14 a.m., 1996. He cleaned the file with an audio restoration tool, more intuition than science. Adjusting gain and echo until the waveform stabilized. And then they listened. The voice was slow, deliberate, not frightened, but reverent. "If memory is the shape of identity, then frequency is its shadow. They speak in resonance, not words. You don't hear them, you become them. We carry them in our dreams, and when enough of us remember, they return." The file ended with a sharp pop, not static, but a biological sound. A heartbeat. Then silence. Hauser's voice broke it. "Civil didn't die in that wing." "No," Gnomes replied. "He dissolved." The implications settled slowly. Hauser turned toward him. "And what if that's what's happening again?" Gnomes answered without blinking. "Then the blackout was never about electricity. It was about attention." They left the forgotten wing in silence. The further they moved from it, the clearer their minds became, as though stepping back into their own thoughts. It was Hauser who broke the quiet first. "So what are we dealing with?" he asked. "Some kind of mind virus?" A signal? Gnomes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out the printout of Dr. Civil's waveform. He laid it against the printout from Elias March, then Clara Vane, then the ambient hum recorded from the echo vault. One by one, he overlaid them. And each time, the pattern became clearer. Not just similar, identical. Gnomes sat down slowly, eyes wide. "They're not isolated cases," he said. "They're fragments." Hauser tilted his head. "Fragments of what?" Gnomes reached for his chalkboard, the one he kept for thoughts too abstract for typing. He drew a shape, a waveform that looped back on itself. A frequency that formed a circle, not a line. "A resonance loop," Gnomes whispered. "It's not meant to spread outward. It's meant to complete itself." Hauser stepped closer. "So these patients, March, Clara, even Civil, they weren't victims?" Gnomes looked up. They were nodes. That night, they reviewed the roster of every patient present during the blackout. 89 names. Gnomes ran them through the resonance monitor, a low-level test that analyzed voice modulation, skin conductivity, and ocular pulse. 77 showed no response. 10 showed minor irregularities. 2, Elias March and Clara Vane, showed full harmonic alignment. But there was one anomaly. A name not listed in the original roster, yet present in the resonance logs. Hauser narrowed his eyes. "Who's Lyra Devane?" Gnome scrolled back. "No room number," he murmured. "No admission file. Only a single note. Resonance lock unstable." They checked every room, every hallway, even the off-books long-term wards. No trace of her. No discharge. No transfer. No report of death. "She was here," Gnome said. "And now, she isn't." But Hauser had begun pacing, a habit he developed when something nagged him. Then he stopped, abruptly. "Gnomes," he said, voice low. "We've been assuming this started at the blackout." Gnomes turned toward him. "What if Lyra Devane was already active, before the surge? And the blackout wasn't the cause. It was the response." They traced the resonance entry back to one of the old MRI terminals, an unused workstation buried deep in the diagnostics wing. According to the machine's log, Lyra Devane's scan had been initiated 5 minutes before the blackout. But the strangest part? The scan never ended. The machine had frozen mid-sequence, caught in an unresolved loop. When Gnomes restarted the monitor, the image appeared, flickering, faint, but there. A girl's silhouette seated upright. Face obscured by static. But still, breathing. "I've seen this before," Gnomes murmured. "In EEGs corrupted by repeated signal interference. The brain tries to assert itself, even when the data won't allow it." Hauser leaned in. "So, she's still in there?" "Not just in the machine," Gnomes whispered. "In everyone who heard her." She hadn't vanished. She had been dispersed. The next question was horrifying in its simplicity. If Lyra had been spread, not physically, but neurologically, where had her consciousness gone? They reviewed the notes on Clara Vane's humming, the unconscious tapping of Elias March, the bloodless seizure of the man in radiology. All the behaviors pointed toward mimicry. Not of each other, but of one source. Like echoes reflecting off different walls. What if each of them wasn't just infected? Hauser asked. What if each of them was repeating a part of her? Gnomes nodded. She fractured, he said. And each piece found a host. The resonance wasn't just sound. It was memory, pattern, behavior, identity. a consciousness that had survived by splitting itself. Hauser looked down at his own shaking hand. Then, can she come back? Only if the hosts converge, Gnomes said, staring into space. Only if the loop completes. That night, Saint Ferris grew quiet again. Too quiet. The few remaining staff on the Blackout wing began to show signs, subtle at first. Unconscious humming. Repeated gestures. Disorientation when hearing certain tones. By 3:14 a.m., 7 staff members had begun moving in perfect synchrony, turning heads at the same angle, blinking on a pattern, breathing to the same rhythm. Hauser and Gnomes watched from the observation room, chilled. They're not even aware of it, Hauser whispered. They think they're awake. They're sleepwalking, Gnomes said. And Lyra's dream is guiding them. She's reforming. The staff turned toward the camera as one, smiled, then began humming in unison, not a tune, but a sustained chord, like a tuning fork drawn across the ribs of the building. Hauser reached for the intercom. Don't, Gnomes said, grabbing his hand. Why? Because they're listening. The speakers buzzed faintly, and then a soft voice whispered back. Almost home. The resonance had reached its apex. At precisely 3:33 a.m., the emergency generator that powered the West Wing dimmed, not due to failure, but as if it were complying. Every corridor light shifted into low, amber flicker. Every monitor slowed its refresh rate. And every person under Lyra's influence stepped forward, in time. Hauser watched from the central viewing gallery, 7 staff members, eyes vacant, breathing steady, humming as one. Their feet moved with precision, not in the direction of any room or exit, but toward the center of the old echo vault. She's using them, Hauser murmured, to complete the loop. Gnomes remained still, his hand resting on a rolling floor stand. In that moment, the patterns came together. She didn't die, he whispered. She distributed herself, like neurocode. The strange dilation in Clara's cochlea, the bone dust in Nurse Mountfield's artery, the tuning of Elias March's larynx, each a biological speaker, wired to amplify her reach. She's not becoming real again, Gnome said softly. She's becoming heard. And then it happened. The staff halted, encircling the echo chamber's entry point. As they held still, a pressure built, not wind, not heat, but something internal, like a vibration beneath the ribcage, thrumming inside the blood. From the intercom, her voice returned, no longer fragmented. I'm ready! And just like that, the lights went out. When the lights returned, they revealed nothing. The humming had stopped. The staff stood as if waking from a deep nap, rubbing their eyes, murmuring soft apologies as if unsure how they'd arrived there. But something was wrong. The resonance detectors, all 3, showed no pattern. Flat lines. And then, Gnomes pointed to the wall. Scrawled in charcoal gray soot were the words, I'm still inside. The realization hit with a jolt. Lyra had not intended to manifest externally. She had chosen permanence within the system, encoded herself not into bodies, but into space. She's no longer looping through minds. Elevators opened and closed without cause. She's activating the full map, Gnome said, trying to complete her identity. Hauser moved toward the circuit breakers, ready to shut everything down. But Gnome stopped him. No! She's tuned into the building's bioelectric field. Cutting the power now might reset the pattern, or destroy everything caught in it. Hauser stared at the screen. And then, an idea. What if we retune it? Gnomes turned sharply. If we introduce a countertone. Hauser continued. Something that interferes just enough with her harmonics. We could dislodge her consciousness without erasing it. A neural desync, Gnomes muttered. Like removing feedback from a loop. Exactly. Hauser ran to the console, pulled up an archived file. Elias March's original hum. Pure. Untainted. Pre-echo. They fed it back through the speakers. At first, nothing happened. Then, the lights pulsed. The tone wavered. The words on the screen glitched. And across every device, her voice softened. I remember. One final note rang out, fragile, bright, unfinished. Then silence. Complete. They walked the ward in the aftermath. Nothing broken, nothing burned. But something had changed. The resonance monitors now recorded normal readings. The staff returned to their routines. Elias March passed quietly the next day, peaceful at last. Clara Vane opened her eyes, smiled faintly, and asked where she was. The hospital didn't speak again. But deep inside the East Wing, under a panel long since rusted over, Hauser found one last message, etched into the marble wall in faint, careful strokes. Thank you for listening. And beneath it, I am whole now. I am home. Dr. Gnome stood beside him, quiet. She didn't want to escape, he said finally. She wanted to be remembered. Hauser nodded slowly, the weight of silence thick and kind. As they walked back down the corridor, the air was still, peaceful. But every so often, only when no one was looking, the vents would whisper back. Months passed. Saint Ferris reopened its east wing in quiet ceremony. The blackout had been marked down as an isolated electrical anomaly, officially unsolved, unofficially forgotten. A fresh coat of paint, new LED panels, a soft rebranding. But some things could not be scrubbed out. Nurses reported occasional static in the white noise machines, a soft warble, just below perception. Not eerie. Almost reassuring. In room 306, now a physiotherapy observation unit, patients said the walls helped them sleep. It's like a lullaby, one whispered. But not one I've ever heard before. Dr. Gnomes returned only once, not to consult, but to listen. He stood in the center of the corridor, arms folded, as the overhead lights flickered gently, not from fault, but in rhythm. I think she's still helping, he murmured. Hauser didn't respond at first. Then, not haunting, guiding? Gnomes nodded. Echoes don't vanish. They just soften. And with that, they stepped outside, into the blue pre-dawn quiet of Saint Ferris Avenue, where the city hummed its own restless song. Not dissonant, not clean, but alive. From somewhere deep within the foundations behind them, just as they crossed the car park's threshold, came a tiny, barely audible sound. A single note. Clear, familiar, content, and fading. Just like breathe behind glass.